One of the most common requests that I receive on the channel is to cover more love stories within mythology, and with today being Valentine's Day, it seems like a perfect time to discuss Eros, the Greek god of love. Now the exact origins and where Eros came from do slightly vary. In some accounts, Eros was a primordial being, a child of chaos. He was also responsible for blessing the union between Gaia and Uranus, who then created the universe as we know it in Greek mythology. He was almost seen as a facilitator, encouraging the unions between other primordial deities. The ancient tragedians saw Eros as both positive and negative, as the unions he created would often lead to virtue as well as misery. In these older depictions, he's often seen as a plump, overweight child carrying a bow. You might be somewhat familiar with his Roman counterpart, Cupid. Anyone who was hit by the arrows he would fire would fall instantly in love, but the question of whether he chose his targets carefully or just fired at random, knowing that they would fall in love regardless, is one that I'll leave you to consider. In the later accounts and the depictions that followed, Eros was considered to be the son of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. There are some conflicting beliefs as to who exactly his father was, with some believing it could have been Hermes and others Zeus, but it's widely regarded that the god of war Ares was his true father. The physical appearance of Eros also shifted in these depictions. Much like his mother and his father, he was considered extremely beautiful, differing vastly from images of a plump child, but he was still regarded as a constant source of trouble for both gods and mortals. Eros is often described as the god of love, but it's very important for us to note that there are many different types of love. Eros himself was a very passionate god, and that is represented by the type of love he had control over. He could make anyone fall in love instantly. Whether those individuals remained in love was another story. He was a god who lived very much in the present, and it's because of this we can almost see him as the god of passion. But with passion comes sexual activity, and that is why he was also associated with fertility. If we take a look at his brother, Anteros, he was also considered a god of love, but in a very different way. Anteros was considered the god of requited love, essentially love that had been returned or rejected, and thus he was often associated with the concept of mutual love. He was also seen as quite a vengeful god, taking actions against those who rejected the love of others. The two brothers are quite often seen as opposites, and there are depictions of them on an opposite end of a scale to show their differences. But despite their differing views on love, the two brothers' physical appearance was quite similar, and even to this day, statues of Anteros are quite often mistaken for Eros. The two brothers are often depicted as long-haired males with wings carrying a bow, but depictions of Anteros slightly differ. At times he can be seen carrying a golden club, and unlike his brother, his wings are more plumed, similar to that of a butterfly. Eros did have a number of followers or minor deities that he was associated with. Pothos and Imeros were amongst the ones that are most commonly seen by his side, and they were thought to represent longing and desire. There were quite a few winged gods who were associated with love and desire. They were referred to as the Erotes, and their exact number does tend to vary, but besides the ones we've just mentioned, they seem to have no distinct mythology, which has led many to believe that they were created to be used in poetic stories and not much more. Perhaps one of the most well-known love stories in all of Greek mythology is that of Eros and Psyche, a tale of love, heartbreak and determination. There was once a king who had 3 daughters of great beauty, but his youngest daughter, Psyche, possessed a beauty that had never been seen before. Many considered her appearance to be perfection. When people laid their eyes upon her, they would often say that not even Aphrodite could compete with such beauty. With more and more people paying attention to Psyche's beauty, they began to forget the goddess. Her temples were abandoned, and the sculptors who once crafted marvelous statues of her now did so for Psyche. Aphrodite began to fade from existence. But the goddess would not sit idly and do nothing as she watched a mortal girl replace her. She commanded her son, Eros, to aid her. "Use your power. Make this little shameless girl fall in love with the vilest and most despicable creature that has ever walked the earth." She commanded her son to shoot Psyche with one of his arrows, but when he first laid his eyes upon her, he was instantly captivated, almost as if his heart had been pierced by one of his own arrows. Eros was faced with a situation that would end poorly regardless of his choice. If he did what his mother asked him, then he would potentially lose the love of his life, but if he disobeyed his mother, he would have to face the consequences. he eventually decided that he would ignore his mother's commands and say nothing of what had happened. Despite being the most beautiful woman on earth, Psyche was extremely lonely. She was unable to make a meaningful connection with anyone. Thousands of men were in awe of Psyche, but they were happy just admiring and worshipping her. No man dared to approach or court her, almost as if she was too sacred. She watched as her sisters had lavish weddings with kings, wishing that one day that would be her. Her father was so desperate to find out what he could do to help his daughter, that he visited the Oracle of Delphi, where he asked Apollo what he could do to find his daughter a husband. Apollo told the king that he should take his daughter to the summit of a mountain wearing a black dress, and there, once alone, she would be given a husband, a terrifying winged serpent that even the gods feared. Her family was devastated by the news, but Psyche began her ascent to the top of the mountain, not knowing what evil awaited her. Psyche waited on the cliff top for hours in the cold, shivering and crying, until she felt a wind of zephyr, and all of a sudden she rose into the air. The zephyr eased her pain and placed her to sleep. When she woke, she was in a soft meadow of freshly cut flowers in front of a castle so magical that it had to belong to a god. When she approached the castle, it appeared to be uninhabited, but she heard a faint voice. "The house is for you. Come in and do not be afraid. Take a bath and then we will honor your arrival." After doing so, Psyche sat patiently waiting for her husband to appear. She could feel his presence was close, and eventually he whispered into her ear. She could tell by his voice that he was no monster, but rather the husband she had always wished for. She would spend most of the day bored, waiting for her husband to arrive in the evening, but when he did, he brought with him great joy. She was still unable to physically see her husband, which did bring her a degree of sadness, so she asked him for one favor, to allow her to see her family, as it would comfort her. At first her husband said no, but as Psyche's sadness grew, he changed his mind. "I will allow your sisters to visit the castle, but heed my warning. If you allow them to influence you, our relationship will be destroyed, and there will be suffering." The following day, Psyche's sisters arrived, and there were tears of joy as they were so pleased to finally see each other again. Her sisters were taken back by all the treasures found in the castle. They had a host of questions for Psyche. "Your husband must be a king, or even better, a god." Psyche told them that he was a young hunter, but the two sisters disregarded her answer, as a hunter could not be so rich. The sisters began to be consumed by jealousy. They knew their happiness paled in comparison to Psyche's, and thus they hatched a plan to hurt their sister. Before the sisters left, they began to taunt Psyche. "Your husband must be the evil snake the oracle prophesied, and that is why you never see him. We pity you, sister. How could you live with such a horrid creature?" Psyche tried her best to ignore what her sisters said, but they had planted the seed of doubt, and she could not get the thoughts out of her head. Why else would he never visit me during the day? What is he hiding from me? Tonight when he is asleep, I will light a candle to see him. If he appears as a snake, then I will kill him. If I am wrong, I will douse my flame and sleep happy. Later that night, when her husband fell asleep, she lit her candle and slowly began to approach him. The light did not reveal a monster, but the most handsome man she had ever seen. Psyche was ashamed of the lack of trust she had shown in her husband, and when she went to douse her flame, the hot wax fell onto her husband, waking him. He looked into her eyes. He wasn't angry, but rather heartbroken. He left their bedroom, and before he flew into the dark sky, she heard him whisper one last time, "Love cannot live without trust." The god of love was my husband, and I did not trust him, she said in despair. Psyche wept for days on end, until she eventually decided that she would do anything to win back the love of her husband. She visited Aphrodite's temple and prayed to the goddess, asking her to persuade her son to take her back. Aphrodite was still overcome with jealousy and wanted her revenge. She told Psyche, in order to make sure that she was an appropriate wife for her son, she would have to prove herself by completing a series of tasks. Only then would the goddess help her. For the first task, Aphrodite showed Psyche thousands of different seeds and told her, "If you cannot separate these, you will never see my son again." But how could she sort all of these seeds? It was impossible. It would take forever. She began to weep uncontrollably, but her cries were heard by a nearby passing colony of ants. They took pity upon the crying girl, and they began to help Psyche sort the seeds, and after a short period, every single seed was sorted into the according pile. Aphrodite had hoped that the hard work and labour would have affected Psyche's beauty, but it did not. For the next task, Aphrodite told Psyche that she would have to make a fleece from the golden sheep that lay across the river. While Psyche swam across the river, a spirit appeared to her, warning her of how dangerous the golden sheep were. The spirit told her, to avoid being killed by the sheep, she should collect the fur from the nearby bushes. Listening to the advice she had been given, Psyche collected enough to make a golden fleece, and in this task she was successful. The next task that Aphrodite set was just as dangerous as the last. She asked Psyche to climb a waterfall that led to the river Styx and fill a bottle she had been given. Once Psyche reached the waterfall, she realised that the surrounding rocks were way too steep and slippery to climb. The task also seemed impossible. But once again, to her surprise, an eagle had flown over the river, taken the bottle from her hand and filling it with the black water from the river Styx. Aphrodite could not hide her bitterness. Someone helped you, otherwise you would not have been able to perform this task by yourself. I will give you one last chance to prove that you are as determined as you claim to be. For her last task, she was given a box to take to the underworld, where she would have to ask Persephone to place some of her beauty inside of it. Psyche began her perilous journey to the underworld, and once arriving, she asked Persephone to drop some of her beauty into the box. Persephone was more than happy to serve Aphrodite, and so she did so. When Psyche returned to Earth, she was more curious than ever about the box. If it contained pure beauty, then she should open the box to look even more radiant for her husband. But when she did, the box did not contain beauty, but only sleep. She had been tricked by Aphrodite, and Psyche fell into a deep slumber. The rest of the gods watched on, and decided that they would take action against Aphrodite's wrongdoing. Hermes was sent to deliver a message to Eros, informing him of his wife's misfortunes. Eros was overcome by what he heard, and the wound of betrayal finally began to heal. He finally left his room in search for Psyche. When he found her, he was able to wake her from her slumber, and the two were able to reconcile. The men back on Earth had forgotten all about Psyche, and once again began worshipping Aphrodite as the true goddess of beauty. The story of Eros and Psyche touches on many issues, including trust, jealousy, revenge, and lust. In the end, we see the determination of Psyche and what many consider to be the power of true love overcome all obstacles. For those of you wondering why Eros didn't show himself to Psyche from the very beginning, he believed that true love between a god and a human was impossible, and that if he showed himself to Psyche, he would lose her. The story shows us that true love is by no means easy. It requires sacrifice, trust, and determination, even if you are the god of love himself. I hope you guys enjoyed today's Valentine's themed video. If you did, then let me know what you thought in the comments below. But as always, I've been your host, Mythology and Fiction Explained.